Greetings, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone out there in YouTube land, and welcome to the Council of One's Babylon 5 review. Glad that you all are here this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're watching from and when you are watching, and glad to have you with us once again for another installment of the Council of Ones. And today we are covering the episode Shadow Dancing in Season 3 of Babylon 5. And with me, as always, I have got my fellow council member. You know him. You love him. He is mountainous in his enthusiasm for this series, Mountains of Elysium. Elysium, good to see you, bud.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
You're welcome. And, of course, to everyone that is in the chat or coming into the chat, Lewis X. Sparrow, Colin P. Smith, gentlemen, always a pleasure to have you with us this evening. So hope you're having a great day and hope this is a nice way for you to wrap up your day or kick off your day or wherever the case may be, depending on when you catch this. So, and right now we are a council of two because unfortunately our good friend Fiona Wolf, she is sadly having to work this evening, so she is not with us. And Zodrider and Lord Kojay, they are somewhere out beyond the rim exploring some ancient ruins and doing what they do best and just being galactic mischief makers, much like our favorite Narn Ambassador Shakar. So, and also to the chat, Bureau 31, good evening, sir. Good to have you with us, and hope you're having a great day. So, this obviously is a really good, as is with all episodes of Babylon 5, and this is definitely this is not even a sort of filler episode. This is a really, really, really good episode. And lots to dig into, lots to talk about. We do have the notes from council member Fiona Wolf, and we'll be delving into those throughout the stream. But that being said, Elysium, let's begin.
Yes, indeed.
Shadow dancing.
I'm just glad Delenn didn't do Min Bobbit on Mr. Sheridan when she went to sleep with him during the night. I think you get the reference.
Yes, I do. I do. Yeah, as in Lorena Bobbitt. So, indeed. Yeah, I do get that reference, and I fully appreciate it. Of course, at this point, we know that Delenn has very strong feelings for Mr. John Sheridan, Captain John Sheridan, soon to be President John Sheridan of the Interstellar Alliance. But yeah, there's a lot going on in this episode. Like I mentioned, we've got the conclusion to Franklin's arc, where he is going on his walkabout, and he finally meets himself, quite literally, which could only happen in a place like Babylon 5. So, Elysium, we can jump into that particular plot point, or if there's another part of this episode you want to delve into, I'm all ears. The floor is yours.
No, I think the walkabout is a good place to start. It's okay. And I'm wondering, do you think it was real or imaginary? Or again, even if it was imaginary, did it matter because it was real to him?
Honestly, being a person of faith, obviously, for those of you who know this, and being a person who does believe in certain aspects of other belief systems, and considering the structure of this series, I'm going to say that this probably was real for Franklin. Do I believe that anyone else saw the other Franklin around? No. Do I believe Franklin saw his other self? Yes, I do believe that very wholeheartedly. And I will bring up one of Fiona's comments here. This is probably the premiere episode with Dr. Franklin. He has to confront all his demons and say, I want to go through it all again, make better decisions. Walkabout made him eventually confront all the stuff he was running away from. Yeah, very true. And Fiona, wherever you are at, madam, thank you for all the notes. We will use them throughout this stream tonight, and appreciate it as always. So, and I'll bring up Colin's comment here.
Yeah, Fiona's notes were really, really great, actually.
Oh yeah. I think it was probably all in his head, but that is what it was supposed to be. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true.
Yeah. But funny, I think that doesn't make it, for me, like that's why I asked the question, it doesn't make it less real, even if no one can see it. In many religious apparitions, others looking on don't see what's happening, even though in my belief system, they are really happening. So I do believe Franklin probably met, maybe it was his guardian angel from going from my belief system, who
Then
appeared to him mirroring what he said to help him.
Yeah. And I will bring up Bureau 31's comment here because this is another possible this is another possibility. Other Franklin, what do you possibly want? Shadow confirmed? Bureau, that's not a bad hypothesis. I can't say that it is not without merit. Perhaps the shadows were trying to keep Franklin from rejoining the group to weaken them. We don't honestly know. I don't think there's anything in any of the. Unfortunately, I never get a chance to check out the Lurkers Guide like the rest of you geeks. I wish I could, but I haven't had a chance to. But I would say that there is merit to that argument that this could have been a shadow masquerading as Franklin and trying to either coerce him to stay away or to possibly go back, one or the other. But considering the path that Franklin takes in this episode, that he decides to go back, even though he does get stabbed and he is dying, honestly, I'm glad that he went through this journey, as he said himself to Garibaldi. He's like, I'm glad I went through this. He's like, and I think he even said something. He echoed it again to Sheridan. And with me, anyways, do I believe in the whole concept, the old Aboriginal concept of going on walkabout till you meet yourself and you sit down and talk until you run out of words? Who am I to say it's not real? It's very possible. It's very, very possible that it is real. As the Bard once said, there is more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy, dear Horatio. So, go ahead, Lisa.
I was thinking it's more of I think the idea with the walkabout, from how I'm looking at, is it's like the old Christian ascetics, that they give up the world. People, the idea is that you walk until you forget what tied you to your old life, to your world, and then you're just there with yourself. You haven't anything to, like Franklin said, you're a doctor, you're a scientist, and it's when you walk past that and forget it and leave it behind, then you meet yourself, because that's all that's left. Your old life is burnt away, and that's probably where their idea of walkabout is.
Yeah, and I'll bring up a Collins comment here at Mountains of Elysium. That's what I meant by supposed to be. Definitely real to Franklin, but even he probably knew it was was also in his head. If that makes sense, yes, Colin, that does make perfect sense. And not to get off on a big tangent here, I've a few years, about 10 years ago, give or take, I went through a very similar experience myself when I went through my divorce to my first wife. I lost my wife. I lost the family that I thought I was supposed to have. I lost my job, which was a fairly decent job. And everything wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but it was work. I lost everything. Everything got either taken away or burned away, and I had to really sit down and think to myself, okay, I am no longer a husband. I am no longer a stepfather. I am no longer this particular form in this position of employment that I once had. What am I? And I really had to do a lot of soul searching and a lot of digging. And in the end, it was my church that helped me get through that whole situation. And looking back now, I realize that it was very much, that was my walkabout. Granted, I didn't meet myself, but I had to confront some very hard questions about what direction I wanted the next phase of my life to go in, and some other decisions I had to make in regards to that as well. And I had to have a very long, hard talk with myself, much like the shadow or shade of Franklin did with the real Franklin. And the counseling that I got in terms of that very much helped me work through all of that. But it was in part, at least at the beginning, it was just me. Because I couldn't really turn to my family and everything. Not that my family wasn't there, my family very much was there. But this was outside of their purview. This was outside of their experience because no one in my family really had ever gone through divorce, at least of my immediate family. And none of them had ever been a step parent or anything of that sort. But I think what this episode of B5 does very well is it allows us to take a step back and ask ourselves, when we remove everything else, who are we? Really, deep down, who are we? And I think that is something that is of value. So, anyway, Elysium, your thoughts on any of that?
No, I agree. It's like for me, like I had some similar journey when I defined myself. I suppose I defined myself by doing things and not really, and letting the situation dictate what those things were, and not trying to decide, well, what situation do I want to be in? And it took me, yeah, I'm still in many ways searching.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I know I don't want, to say when you come near the end, your life flashes before your eyes. You don't want to see a pair of feet and a remote control in your hands, and that's it. You want
Mm-hmm.
something more from life than that. And
Yeah.
I had no experience losing. I lost both parents within 7 months of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, I didn't know who I was. And then I faced, loads of things happened, legal. Let's not delve too deep. But at the end, I had to rediscover who I was, what I wanted. And like with Franklin, I have to look back and say, had I not gone through that, I would not be with the wonderful woman I am today.
Yeah.
She's amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a different person because of my experiences. And had
Mm-hmm.
I not gone through it, my life would be totally different. And I don't think for the better. I think I learned hard lessons. I make the same mistakes again.
Mm-hmm.
But like Franklin said, I do it all again. Maybe a little different, but I do it all
Yes.
again.
Yeah, and that's the real question that we all have to ask ourselves. We go through all this pain, we go through all these trials and tribulations and everything else of the sort, and we have to ask ourselves, despite all the pain and all the heartache that we experience, do we choose to go ahead and go back through that again, or do we turn tail and run? Or perhaps we choose another path which might be more beneficial, at least at first glance. And for Franklin, what he's going through in this episode is he gets in a situation where he should not belong, but he's trying to do the right thing. And it's almost as if that moment was meant to happen. It was almost as if he was supposed to run into that mugging. And that's what caused him to finally trigger meeting himself and having that conversation. And something that he said to Garibaldi is, I come to find out I didn't like myself very much. And that's true because oftentimes we can be our own worst enemy, we can be our own worst critic, and we can oftentimes do things to ourselves that we regret. And And, I have to ask myself, if I had the opportunity to go back and tell my younger self or myself 10 years ago, or maybe even 12 years ago, don't go down this road. It's too hard, it's too painful, and you're going to go through a lot of stuff that you're going to wish you hadn't gone through. And I have to say, would I have maybe made some different choices? Sure. Would I have interacted with my now ex-wife? Probably not. I probably would have been the better for it. Because you don't know what alternate events might be triggered that would reveal certain things about yourself that you didn't know, in particular with me discovering I was adopted. Any number of things could have led to me discovering that revelation. And it didn't necessarily have to be my ex-wife finding the adoption papers. So for Franklin, could he have said, I shouldn't have gone down there to try and stop the guy from being mugged and me getting stabbed and almost dying? Yeah, he could say that. And something else could have triggered him meeting himself, but it could have taken far longer if that particular event had not happened. Yeah. And that right there, I think, is the really interesting part of Franklin's journey. You come to a fork in the road, as he said not too long ago, and you go left, and the rest of you goes right. The most important parts of yourself, what really makes you you, they disappear. And by doing what he did, by sticking his neck out for a complete stranger, he was able to reconnect with himself. He was almost like Peter Pan getting his shadow sewn back on again. And as always with Straczynski, his titling of his episodes is always very deliberate, because shadow dancing doesn't just refer to what the beginning of the alliance against the shadows is doing, but it also refers to Franklin as well, because he's very much in a shadow dance himself.
Yeah. I think from what we've been mentioning, Franklin himself, the real Franklin, the important part of Franklin, always would have walked into that situation to try and help. The selfish part may have made a different choice, but that would have been another fork in the road where the important part of him went into that situation, and the bit of him that walked away, the lesser part, might have survived, but it wouldn't be him. He'd have needed to go a walkabout to re-find himself again.
Mm-hmm. This time it's once and it's done, and he can move on. And Fiona included this quote. When I thought I was going to die, even after everything that had happened, I realized I didn't want to let go. I was willing to do it all over again, and this time I could appreciate the moments. I can't go back, but I can appreciate what I have right now, and I can define myself by what I am instead of what I'm not. And what are you? Alive. Everything else is negotiable. Franklin to Sheridan. We sometimes get caught up in the bigger things of life, or the minutia, the little things that don't really make up a whole lot of difference, but we blow them way out of proportion. And unfortunately, we miss out on what is truly important. And that's where we can lose track of ourselves too. I mean, let's be candid here. With everyone's life as crazy and as harried as it often is, it can be very easy to lose track of oneself. And I think this is a cautionary tale by Straczynski to the audience, that if you aren't careful, you might lose the best parts of yourself, and you might end up like Stephen Franklin. and you don't want to go down that road. And to the chat, Johnny Alpha, graphic vandalism, is good to see you, man, and it has been a while. Always a pleasure to have you in the chat, and hope you enjoy the stream this evening, and hope you're having a good week, and hope this is kickoff to a good weekend for you. We're just out in Babylon 5. We're coming up on the tail end of season 3. We're talking about the episode Shadow Dancing. And anyway, Elysium, the floor is yours, my friend.
It was. I'm just trying to think. It was something that popped into my head. The Marcus's comment in Grey 17. Next time, could you, when you're trying to teach me a lesson, could it be something less unpleasant? And I think Franklin would love to have said the same thing.
Yeah. The quote, and this is not me trying to play one-upsman. Don't think that.
No, not at all.
The next time you're looking for you're seeking revelation, could you perhaps choose a method that's a little less uncomfortable? That's my
that's fantastic.
Neroon. That's my Neroon laugh.
And those two characters, Neroon and Frank and Marcus, are just amazing. But it's interesting that JMS, being an atheist, gets spirituality, gets religion, gets a deep meaning, more so than many people who claim to be Christian writers or religious writers. He really got to the core of many things.
Well, yeah,
for a common experience.
Yeah, because that's the great thing about Straczynski. And even though he is an atheist, I still respect him. You know, he stands by his convictions, regardless of if they are theistic or atheistic. He stands by his convictions, and I very deeply appreciate that about the man. I mean, as I've said before, there are creators out there who are atheistic and who can be a little hand-fisted in their derision of people of faith. And then there are people like Straczynski who can be more well-balanced. And that's the thing that's one of the many aspects of Straczynski that I absolutely appreciate and respect. I mean, the man really knows how to write his characters to where they are interesting, they're in depth, and you can, whether it's one or many characters, you can identify with what they're going through, you can identify with their journey, and you can identify with their evolution. And it's all crafted so well. I mean, you have to really. Okay, just for a moment, I'll bring up something and everything that, like, my fan fiction that I'm working on currently. I had to take a step back before I even started and ask myself, what is it about the characters, both from the OT and the ST, and even a little bit from the PT, original trilogy, sequel trilogy, and prequel trilogy, that I want to incorporate into my story? And then I had to ask myself one question further. Where are they going to end? What are going to be the major beats of their journey? And how that is that ultimately going to culminate with their conclusion? Straczynski does the exact same thing. I'm sure he had to sit down, and he really had to think out, where is Sinclair going to go? Where is Sheridan going to go? Ivanova, Garibaldi, Franklin, Veer, Delenn, Neroon, all of them. What is going to be the conclusion for each one of these characters' journeys? And what you see with Franklin is you don't see necessarily the zenith or the end of his journey, but you see a major series of events in his journey that really have a strong impact upon his journey, upon his character's journey going forward. And kind of to segue a little bit here, I'll bring up Fiona's comment about Sheridan. Sheridan being all protective and wanting to Delenn to stay behind to watch the station is cute, but she pushes the issue, saying she'd rather be there on the command deck with him since they are a team. But they know the Shadows want to destroy all those refugees in the safe sector, so they have to commit now or lose momentum. And we get to see a bit more of the various rituals Minbari have for selecting mates. It's a foregone conclusion at this point, but Delenn delights in sharing her culture's rituals. Since their first night was on the White Star and in messages from Earth. That's true. You know, the one part of this episode, just let me say this real quick, Elysium. I love the fact that this opens with Delenn not confronting, but debating with the remnants of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds. And she's like, we need as many ships as you can muster, as many ships as you've got available, because we're going in and we're going in hard, and we may be going in shorthanded, but we need these ships. And she doesn't back down. I mean, you really see the forceful side of Delenn's character in that moment. And I absolutely, positively love that about her. When she's forceful, she brings it. So, Elysium, please.
It was the first time, and I love that scene myself. It was the first time, it may have been there before, but it was the first time I really noticed her wearing the Ranger 1 pin.
Yes.
And she was standing in front, and the robes, and she was standing in front of them, knowing that she might walk out empty-handed, and she was still willing to face it. And she did get a bit of flack, and understandable, because every one of them had been at war with each other, and you were trying to get people who had just been at war a couple of weeks previous having to work and trust each other. And what she did was, well, she did get some, maybe not as much as she was hoping, but she put on an amazing performance.
Well, and even Sheridan said once she reports back to him, he's like, they're still holding out. And she's like, yeah, you can't necessarily blame them. And he's like, yeah, I know, but we need every ship we can get our hands on if this is going to work. And they're right, because you see the aftermath of the battle, and they lose a lot of ships. I mean, they even give the numbers. For every one ship that they destroy, they lose 2, which just shows how powerful a single shadow vessel really is. I mean, you see the battle itself, and they're hitting them hard, but the shadows are hitting just as hard, or hitting just as hard, excuse me. And, you know, it's the first time that you see certain classes of ships working in concert with one another, and how this is the early start of the Interstellar Alliance fleet. At least without that isn't just solely the White Stars, but all of the races that will eventually make up the Interstellar Alliance coming together to work together for a common goal. And it is nothing short of impressive. I mean, I love Sheridan's expression and his reaction when they enter that large dark chamber where they often would have the Great Council meetings or whatever, and he's like, I don't see instrumentation. I don't see any view screens. And she's like, you will. And I have to admit, I love his reaction that when the thing comes down, he's like, they can hear me. She's like, oh, yes. And it's amazing to me that a Earth Force commander who has never operated any type of Minbari technology, really, except for the White Stars, I mean, he's seen the view screens that are in the White Stars, and they're not much they're not much different from the ones that you see on a Minbari cruiser, but still, he's surprised. And I would myself love to know how exactly that all works. I would love to get the schematics of a Minbari cruiser and figure out how everything ticks and how everything works. Because even for me as a geek, that to me is really interesting. I have a feeling that technology is not much different from what the Vorlons employ in their own ships. Would not be the least bit surprised at all.
Yeah, I think, well, the White Stars, I do believe, are Minbari, but they have Vorlon adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
the Minbari's own ships themselves are powerful, and it really said how strong the shadows were when a shadow battle crab cut one shotted a Minbari cruiser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that just that alone would put chills down the spine. And I just looking back through my notes, it was just something that with Delenn, it was I kind of have it down here as the Braveheart moment where she told him they must risk the survival of their home worlds for this one chance at victory, because it's the victory they needed if they had any hope of surviving.
Yeah. Well, and I even think the shadows were taken aback because they eventually do run. They realize they're outweighed here. They're outweighed in this battle. And they realize that even as powerful as their ships are, when you get a coalition of the League and everybody else together, they can kick some serious butt. I would have been very intrigued. I will not lie. I would have been very intrigued if Clark had not been the one in power and somebody else had been, and the Earth Force military had been a part of the alliance. I would have loved to have seen an Omega class destroyer go up against a Shadow capital ship. I have a feeling it wouldn't have been as one sided as we might think, because an Omega class destroyer, they pack a punch.
Yes, it's something that I always found fascinating. The JMS set up the humans to be, I think he said, bottom third tier, but humans went from just small backtrack. The Centauri, the Drazi had interstellar travel for about 1,000 years, just after the last Shadow War. And humanity in 50 years went from discovering jump gate technology from the Centauri to defeating the Dilgar,
Yep.
who had been curb stomping the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, including the Drazi. And Earth joined and just stomped them. And powerful.
Well, and the interesting thing for me is, well, I do believe that our technology did play a factor in the war against the Dilgar. I have a feeling that it was also our strategic ability, our minds, that really helped turn the tide. Because think about this. To the Dilgar, we, humans, are an unknown. We are an unknown variable that we cannot predict or figure out. So when you bring a completely new variable into play, that's going to toss everything out the window about what you think you know about your enemy. And I think that might have been one of the biggest keys to the reason why the Dilgar were stomped by the League and by the Earth Alliance. So, and I do want to say to the chat, a long lost face we have not seen in a very long time. Speaker for the Dead, Speaker, is good to see you. Hope you're having a wonderful evening and glad you could tune in tonight, and hope you enjoy the stream, my friend. So, and I will bring up Colin's comment here really quick. For anyone familiar with Honor Harrington series, there's a similar line. The Vorlons and Shadows have not yet had a serious threat for so long that they underestimate how quickly others can change. And I think the same is true when we were talking about the Dilgar conflict, Colin. The Dilgar had been dealing with the League of Non-Aligned Worlds for so long that they didn't think that anyone else could come in and kick their ass. And then you get us humans. well, we've been kicking ass on our own world for several hundred years or 1,000 years, and we've gone through a lot of wars and everything else, and we've learned from every single one of those wars. So I think, honestly, um, when the Earth Alliance entered the Dilgar War, we brought a lot with us. We had shed a lot of blood, we had gone through a lot of battles, and we had lost a lot, but we learned from every single engagement, every battle, whether it was major or minor. We learned, we adapted, we grew, and we changed. And when we got the right tools in our hands, we could kick some serious butt.
Yes. And
I'll bring up Colin's comment here. Go ahead, Elysium, please.
I'm thinking that would be something if they ever revisit the Babylon 5 universe, seeing the Dilgar War would be an interesting series to see.
Yeah, I would agree. And you could even, I mean, all the major characters do play a part, but here's the cool thing that you can do. They're young enough that you could potentially cast different actors or actresses to play those parts. So if they wanted to do something like that, if somebody wanted to do a project like that with JMS's blessing, which I'm sure he would probably give, of course, you probably have to get the excuse me, beg your pardon, get clearance from Warner Brothers, and that sometimes cannot always be easy. But I think if you could at least get the blessing from Straczynski, if somebody wanted to do a fan film or something like that, even if it was an animated fan film, that would be a cool thing to see. Do it like in little short episodics, little short episodic videos and everything to kind of cut down the cost. Colin P. Smith, yeah. I'll bring up his comment here. Not like us, you will become with us. Yep. Deathwalker from the episode titled simply Deathwalker, Season 1. Of course, there's another great quote. You are not ready for immortality. The late Kosh Nenarek. So, but yeah, obviously we have the very shocking conclusion to this episode where we see Bruce Boxleitner's real life wife make an appearance. Of course, the one of television's most enduring faces, Melissa Gilbert.
Yes.
Laura Ingalls. Now, Anna Sheridan. And of course, Anna Sheridan's face has changed a couple of times, or twice during the run of this series. And I cannot say that I disapproved of them using Melissa Gilbert as Sheridan's spouse. I know some people may have had an issue with it, but I think it really gave them an opportunity to work together for one, but also I think it enhanced the situation in the next episode, Zaha Doom, as well. Because you have a husband and wife playing off one another. And that is not necessarily a bad thing because it really introduces a really cool dynamic. So, yep, Speaker for the Dead, Little House on the Prairie. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, at least in your thoughts on them casting Melissa Gilbert as Anna Sheridan.
I think I do believe the original actress was unavailable, and it was one of those situations where they had to have the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember. I remember some interview where JMS was saying we're going to go looking for someone, and then they realized, hang on, Bruce's wife is an actress.
Mm-hmm.
Why not just ask her?
Yeah. And I'll bring up Colin's comment here and everything. And I think you mentioned it was the original actress unavailable, or was there some other reason? As Elysium said, Colin, I think it was just a simple fact that she was unavailable. There was maybe some sort of scheduling conflict, which does happen. Yeah, Speaker for the Dead. I love seeing her in the show, and I will say I loved her reaction. You must be Delyn. I'm Anna Sheridan, John's wife. And I'm like, damn! She just laid the smack down without actually lifting a finger. I'm like, jeez. And Delenn, who isn't very often the shrinking violet, turns into the shrinking violet. And I don't want to spoil the conversation for next week, because next week's episode is going to be really, really juicy, because I want as many of the council that can be here to be here for that conversation. But just that one line, holy hell. Melissa Gilbert had not lost her acting chops whatsoever. The only thing that sucks is the fact that her and Boxleitner are now divorced. Yeah. That makes me a little sad. That makes me very sad. Yeah, that does stink.
I was just, as a slight little joke, I was just thinking if Delenn had known about O'Loughley, and she went, was it John's wife? Which one?
Yeah, totally.
Only way to smack back.
Yeah,
But I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Elysium, please. Go ahead.
I was just thinking with that line that you must be Delenn, that if you really kind of step back, that means that she knew about Delenn, she knew about John, but she'd made no contact with them. So there was something off already. Because if she was, I know myself, if I was separated from my wife, I wouldn't wait. I'd go straight. I wouldn't want to wait.
Mm-hmm.
So something else was going on something else was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I cannot say I disagree with that. But you have to figure Morden probably reported back everything that he knew, more than likely. And he might have been the one that actually clued the shadows in, like, hey, I've got an asset. This one lady that you plugged into one of your ships, turns out she's the presumed deceased wife of your chief pain in the neck. And speaker, yeah, I cannot say I disagree, but you almost get a feeling for how she was before then. You get the impression that they had a very good marriage. I mean, granted, they didn't see each other all that much, but they did love one another. They did care about one another. I mean, the fact that Sheridan was carrying a torch for her 2 years after she had been presumed dead, that says a lot for him, especially. And I'll bring up Colin's comment here real quick. Well, as I recall, Delenn knew what had happened to Anna by then. Yeah, Colin, I think you're right. She suspected. Yeah, she and Kosh knew too. I did want to touch upon the conversation after the battle when it's Garibaldi and Ivanova and Sheridan in his office, and they're talking about that vision that he had back when he had gotten hurt, and Kosh had spoken to his mind, and he has that really weird dream in black and white, and Ivanova's got the raven on her shoulder, Garibaldi's got the dove on his shoulder, and Sheridan makes the comment, he's like, science, portents, dreams. He's like, next thing you know, we'll be reading tea leaves and chicken head trails. And I'm like, dude, do you realize that your chief medical officer just went on walkabout because of his own beliefs? That's a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black. I'm just saying. So, but I love how that whole sequence is tied together into this moment here in Shadow Dancing, because Sheridan is a person that very much operates on the rational frame of the rational spectrum, but he does have some belief system. Although it is rather unorthodox, he does have one, and that's honestly, I think that's one of the really intriguing things about him, that he can be a person of belief or faith or whatever, but he would make a comment like that. Yeah. Because even to him, it seems too far-fetched.
I'm just trying to think that with Sheridan's belief is closer to Membari beliefs, I believe, than and actually in some way to Franklin, then I think he's maybe willing to admit it's that you see when future times when the Mambari talk about how the universe acts, when the Narn talk about it, and how Franklin talks. It's a very, very similar belief system. It's just different, looking at the same belief from different angles.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to that episode a couple, not too long ago, when Garibaldi is down in grade 17 and he's talking to our good friend, Robert England, Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
I forget the character's name off the top of my head, but and the guy is like, the Mabari know this. They are closer to the truth than we are. And that is true.
Yes.
And even for the universe to sprout such various races, all in the attempt to explore and understand itself. Where do the Shadow and the Vorlon fit in there? I'm just saying.
Actually, if we think back about the Shadows and the Vorlons are physical manifestations, but was it Colin mentioned earlier about the Shadows maybe appearing as as Franklin?
Yeah.
Maybe the spirits of the universe, the unseen, maybe it was a shadow that influenced the shadows in the real world. Maybe it was a similar spirit.
That's a possibility. That's a very distinct possibility. So, but yeah. Yeah, I'll bring up Colin's comment here. We are the universe made flesh, trying to understand itself. And sometimes we go on walkabout so that we can understand ourselves better. And perhaps catch that part of ourselves that we lost. So,
let's see, there was something JMS mentioned, something about that in the Lurker's Guide. I'm just trying to find it here. It's a long quote. But if you don't mind, I'll read out some of it.
Sure, absolutely.
He was asked, have you ever gone on walkabout? He said, well, yeah, kind of when I was living in San Diego. Before it got nuked. Well, that hasn't happened yet, but soon. I got into a similar mode of thought. I would go for walks through downtown San Diego at 2 or 3 in the morning, hours and hours just walking through parts of an area where I could have gotten killed. When folks asked me why, I couldn't answer. All I could come up with was, I was looking for something.
Yep, very true. Well, and the crazy thing is, with Sheridan in particular, he has to go on a sort of walkabout. Granted, it's not as long, but although it is far more traumatic, because he doesn't meet himself, but he meets someone who understands him better than he understands himself, and that will, of course, be Lorianne, who understands everybody better than they understand themselves. Of course, that is for season 4. That is to come. So, but yeah, I think we've pretty much broken this sucker down into its smallest molecule, trying to understand it. So
there is one thing to mention that Sheridan ordered Marcus and Ivanova possibly to their death. He said, I want to give you 50-50 chance of survival. It showed he was going back to the Comes the Inquisitor. He's the right person in the right place at the right time. Exactly. He was willing to put, because Marcus and Ivanova were the 2 best people for the job he sent them on. And he was willing, without hesitation, to order them to do it. Just as he would order Bryan Cranston in the in a couple of episodes. Well, it'll be in season 4. Yes. He says, you don't get me. You have to make it look good, but you have to be captured because they need that information in their hands, and it has to look good. It shows that before he met Lorianne, that was Sheridan. Lorian will only bring maybe a more refined version of him out.
Yes. I can't say I disagree with that whatsoever. So, because for Sheridan to make that call to send one of his closest friends and one of his best soldiers into a potentially life and death situation, it's not an easy thing. It is never an easy thing to send a person to their death or potentially to their death. But that's what is sometimes required. And it takes a strong will to make that sort of decision. And that just shows the strength of John Sheridan's will and why he will eventually become the one who will be.
And especially as many leaders will have ordered people to their deaths, but Sheridan will look them in their face. It shows to the character.
Yeah, very true. So, well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here, folks. But I want to thank every one of you for tuning in this afternoon or this evening, just depending on what time zone or what part of the world that you're watching this or listening to this in. And as always, leave your comments down below and let us know what you thought about the episode Shadow Dancing. And of course, we will be back next week, same time, 5:30 Central, with another installment of the Council of Ones. And to just offer a little piece of friendly advice, as I did to Mr. Colin P. Smith earlier, make sure you hit those reminders. Whenever I set these links up, whenever I set these streams up, and I usually do them in advance, you all know this by now, hit that reminder bell. That way you won't miss out. And of course, if you come across this stream and you enjoyed the conversation with me in Mountains of Elysium, granted, some of our other council members weren't here today physically, but they were here in spirit, I would say, most definitely. Subscribe to the channels that make up the Council of Ones. They are all worth your time. They are all enlightened beings, and it is always a pleasure to have them on with me. And until next time, this is the Council of Ones saying 1, 2, 3. Zooty, zooty,
Zoot, zoot,
zoot, zoot, zoot.
zoot.